tonight to Garden 101 with Todd. Todd is the owner of Grateful Gardens down in Hanover, and he does this presentation in a few different places, so I'd like to present Todd to you.
Hi everybody. Hi. How's it going? I affectionately call myself the Grateful Gardener. I'm grateful to be gardening. I'm grateful to have my hands in the dirt any chance I can. I've been gardening since I was a boy. I just want to welcome you all here. Let's everybody just take a big deep breath and we're here, okay? So now we're here. I want you to think about the first thing that you ever planted a seed for. If you've ever grown anything, I just want to take you to a place, like just get there and just think about that first thing that you ever planted and remember the feelings that you came from that, and that'll hopefully inspire you to continue to want to garden. And then as we're out in TV land too, also all of the rest of everybody out there, because I know we're going to show this on TV, think about things that you've planted, think about things that you've grown, and try and get back to that, because there was an inspiration that happened that turned me into a lifelong gardener when I first planted morning glories on our white picket fence, and I woke up one morning and I saw these cheery things that were open, and then by the end of the day they were closed, and I was a boy and I'm scratching my head thinking to myself, this doesn't make sense. They were open this morning, why are they closed now? But now I remember when I plant morning glory seeds, back to that time that made me love planting things. And morning glories can be fun for me and not fun for you. There's a wild one that grows in most of our gardens that's invasive that I'm not a huge fan of, but some of the prettier ones that come in reds and purples and whites and pinks are actually quite spectacular, but they're not vegetables. And you guys are community gardeners, so I'm going to try and tailor this as best I can to community garden values and things that'll help you guys improve your community gardening skills, but also at the same time just to be better gardeners in general. And wherever you are on your journey as a gardener, I can help you. I can find a way to inspire you, and I can also give you information that I've gathered over a lifetime of gardening. From the first time I saw my dad dumping a huge pile of horse crap in the yard and thinking to myself, Dad, what are you doing? And saying, Dad, what are you doing? Why is this big pile of horse poop in our yard? And him saying, oh, we're going to fix the soil and make everything grow better. And realizing, wow, there's a lot more to this than I thought, but my dad was just making awesome tomatoes. And from that point on, I've always kind of paid attention to these things and tried to figure out why is it that plants are growing this way or that way, and what's doing better in this condition and that condition. And as such, I've grown things from a railing on a deck to a full garden, 20 by 20 to 50 by 50, to things in closets, to containers and greenhouses. I've done all kinds of soil experiments as I've tested dozens of different potting soils, and I'm going to bring all that experience and I'm going to give you guys everything I can from that. But what I want to do first is just explain to you and everybody out there why it's a good idea to grow your own vegetables. And I know a lot of you guys have your own personal reasons for this, but mine started with something I found on grocery store and farm selection criteria as to how what they grow is chosen. And the first thing that they choose when it comes to what they grow on a farm is economical harvest. Okay, so the first thing that comes into their decision making as to what type of variety they're going to grow is how economically can I harvest this crop. Okay, the second is how economically can I ship it. Okay, so you guys have all seen those purple containers when the guy at the Shaw's or Stop and Shop or whoever you shop from is unloading the crates of food, and you see these trays that they have the food on. There's a reason for that, and then the reason why that tray works is because the produce that was selected, each individual fruit lines up perfectly and can sit into that tray. The third is shelf life. Okay, so now how long is this item going to last on the shelf? The fourth is appearance. Okay, so first how are we going to be able to harvest it? How are we going to be able to ship it? How long is it going to last, and what does it look like? Okay, the fifth is taste. So the fifth thing that they're taking into consideration is taste. The last thing, and I added this myself, this isn't on their list, nutrition. So when I start to think about growing my own food and I start to think about all the seed catalogs full of dozens and dozens of varieties of tomatoes and cucumbers and hundreds of types of beans that are out there and sweet potatoes of all different colors, and I realized to myself that when I go to the grocery store, the last thing they have in mind is how well it's going to make me feel. Is it going to help me nutritionally? Is that food actually full of nutrition? And when I take a tomato now from my garden, I understand that because of the way that I created the soil in my garden, the density of nutrients in that tomato are far superior to anything that I could get at the grocery store. And then I started thinking to myself, wow, all right, so if they're only going for harvest, shipping, shelf life, appearance, and taste, then where does that leave me? Because I know that there are hundreds of tomatoes out there. And I know they all taste different. Some of them are wonky looking, some of them look amazing, some of them taste better than others. But when I want to garden, I'm thinking to myself, geez, why am I going to do this? Am I going to try and make money? Am I going to save money? Why am I going to garden? And when it comes right down to it, it's about nutrition. Because I know what I grow in my yard is going to have more nutrients in it than what comes from a farm. And I can explain to you guys this in depth, and I can hold myself accountable, and I can teach you guys why that the soil can influence the nutrients in a produce that you'll eat. But that's not why we're here. We're here because we want to learn how to garden better, because you guys have all gardened. I'm just telling you why it's important to me to be a home vegetable gardener, on top of all the scientific studies that have shown the soil microbes will improve your mental health when you're in contact with the soil on your skin. I know that the food I can grow is better, but I want to help you guys grow food better. All right, I want to teach you guys the things that I've learned that have helped me improve the outcomes of what I grow. And so what we're going to do is we're going to start with sunlight, and then we're going to go into the soil, and then we're going to talk about watering and the techniques that it takes after you start the plants, okay? So in terms of sunlight, you need at least 6 hours of light a day, all right? So the minimum amount of direct sunlight for vegetable crops is going to be 6 hours, okay? Any more is obviously going to be better. Anything less is going to have an impact on the yields. It doesn't mean that the plants won't grow, it just means that they won't yield as much, okay? So if you have less than 6 hours, okay, don't not try and grow something, just anticipate that it's not going to yield as much as it would if it was in 6+ hours of light. This is really important, it's something to remember in your community garden. This isn't going to be a factor, but at your home. And also when we talk about our home, we're going to talk about the spheres where we're growing things in relationship to the community garden. But on the south side of your house, or a shed, or a fence, the sunlight hits that and bounces off, okay? And what happens is we end up with a little microclimate. I think some of you might have noticed when you're driving, some sides of houses end up with the daffodils up sooner in the spring. And you start to notice that their daylilies are taller on this side of the house. It's the south side of the house, and there's a reason for that. When the sunlight hits the house, the radiation absorbs into the house in the form of heat, which then bounces off of the house and onto the soil, which warms the soil. And so that south-facing zone of a house is protected from northeast winds, but it also is reflecting the heat, and so things grow sooner. So if you have a crop that you really wanted to try and grow, say something that was really a heat lover, but you didn't have a place in your yard or somewhere that was going to be that hot, try and think that there are little microclimates in your yards. Sunlight bouncing off of a building actually produces more sunlight than the actual day length that you're getting. So if you're getting 6 hours, the plant is receiving at least half of that and bounce back as it bounces off of the house. Include the heat that gets stored in the side of the house and in the soil, and now you've increased that zone of warmth that will help the plants grow there. So heat lovers, it's a good idea. This is something to think about. You don't necessarily have to have full sun to grow many of the things that we love. I've had plants in pots that were in the shade, all my herbs in the shade, 2 hours of direct light a day, and I've had a chive plant for 15 years in the same bucket for 2 hours of light. So it doesn't necessarily have to be scorching sun, all right? And actually, once you guys get out to the community garden, you need to be planning for accounting for the fact that you're in full sun, all right? Before we get to that, I want you to just think of one thing. At your community garden, you have to travel a distance to get there, okay? So if you have any space at home for things that need more tending, more water, or are needing to be harvested more frequently, I want you to try and plant those things close to home. In your home zone, if you have that opportunity, lettuces, things that are going to need more attention, strawberries, things like asparagus, that if in a day you miss the community garden, that asparagus is going to go past its prime. All right, so when I think about my spheres, I'm putting things that need attention and frequent harvesting very close to me, where I can do it regularly versus where I have to drive to the community garden. So I would be thinking about things that need less attention: potatoes, garlic, onions, squash, not summer squash because they come like this, winter squash, right? Something that would be less than a tomato, but not as much as a cucumber, because cucumbers need a lot of attention in terms of you have to keep them moist. They do require moist. But then this is the thing when you start to talk about microclimates. Cucumbers prefer afternoon shade. They're mostly water. They don't want to be out in the scorching sun all the time. So if you're growing tomatoes, use them on a trellis to create shade that helps protect the cucumbers in the afternoon. So you're thinking more about not only is my tomato plant going to get tall, but it's going to give me a benefit in the fact that if I plant correctly, it'll create shade. And I want that shade because I know certain things are going to really appreciate that. Basil, for instance, is going to love that afternoon shade. Basil's grown in filtered light get bigger, fatter, thicker leaves than ones in scorching sun. They get thinner and more narrow leaves. So don't be afraid about sunlight at your home. Take advantages of things. Put some things in pots. Lettuces and carrots can do great in pots, but they need lots of water. Keep them close to home. And then when you get to your community garden, do more stable crops that can be watered less frequently and are going to tolerate full sun, okay? Any questions on sunlight? Length of time? No? All right, so we got the light, and I know you guys have plenty of light at the community garden. It's full sun. It's a farm, so it's very little. All right, so the soil. All right, the soil is the most important part, okay? The soil is your plant's stomach, all right? The plant's roots go into the stomach, and everything that they need is in the soil, okay? If we are good stewards for our plants, we're going to understand that the stomach is the most important part for the plant, okay? So the roots are going to go into the soil, and they're going to take up nutrients from the soil, but they're also going to bring up water, all right? So when we water, okay, we understand that the soil can only hold so much, but it can also only retain so much, okay? So it can bring it and it can let it go, but it can also retain some moisture, okay? So when we try and think about our soil, there's a good way of understanding the water capacity, and there's certain tests that we can do. So determining what type of soil you have is a great way of understanding how much water capacity it has to hold, okay? So if you take a scoop of the soil and you squeeze it in your hand and it all falls apart, it's a sandy soil, right? And you could tell if it was sandy, right? Sandy soil is going to drain really well, but it's not going to retain a lot of moisture. If you take your handful of soil and you squeeze it and it forms a clump and then you hit it with your finger and it doesn't fall apart, it just stays there, that's an indication that you have a clay soil. Clay soils will retain lots of moisture, they won't drain well, okay? And then ideally, you're gonna take this handful of soil and you're gonna squeeze it and then you're gonna hit it with your finger and it's gonna crumble like cake. All right, if it crumbles like cake, still kind of holds together but doesn't fall completely apart, that's ideal, right? So you're right in between too much clay and too much sand, all right? So you're gonna have a good balance of moisture retention, organic matter, and also drainage. When I build the soil, my #1 priority is moisture retention. The reason for this is because the thing that takes the most time other than weeding is watering, right? And so I want my soil to retain as much moisture as I possibly can while at the same time draining well, all right? And this is gonna lead us right into watering, all right? Watering, when we water our plants, is key. And what the #1 thing that we can do to help our plants is not water overhead. We're not gonna use overhead sprinkler systems. We're not gonna sprinkle the whole garden with all, a sprinkler system or anything like that. We're gonna water at the base of the plants, okay? And there's a really good reason for this is because wet plants are damp plants. Damp plants are more susceptible to disease. The primary diseases that we have in our gardens are mildew-based. Powdery mildew and blight are both based off of mold and mildew. Those thrive in moist conditions. So if your plants are constantly wet, then they're going to be more susceptible to disease. So if you have to give your plants a bath, because plants like baths, and they'll sprinkle them and they enjoy that, and they will absorb moisture through their leaves, but we need to steward them in a fashion as to keep them dry as much as possible. Because the rain and the humidity and the dew are going to be moisture enough for them. So we're going to try and do our best to keep them dry. All right, when we water deeply. We water as deeply as we possibly can, and then we allow the soil to dry. All right, there is not going to be any, I'm watering a little bit every day, because that's not going to be good for your plants. All right, and I'm going to explain this to you why. When the soil dries out, the plant's roots are into the soil, and they will chase the water. As the soil dries, the roots will be stimulated to go after it. The deeper the water is, and the longer it takes to go down, the deeper the roots will be. If you water it a little bit every day, the top of the soil is going to be moist, right? And guess where the plant's roots are going to be? Right there, right at the top. They have no reason to go deep if it's always moist at the top because you're watering it a little bit every day, all right? What happens on the day when it's really hot and you can't get there to water that day? Now your plant has all its roots right up here at the surface, and where is the water gonna go away first? The surface, right? So if you're watering deeply, less frequently, the roots will be stimulated to go down deeper, and therefore you'll have a more resilient plant when you can't make it to water all the time. I try to personally water once a week, really deep. Now, there are exceptions to this because some things are mostly water, like lettuce, right? You can't water lettuce without getting it wet, for one, okay? Because it's all over, it's gonna get wet when you water it, so we're not gonna worry about that in terms of disease. But you do kind of need to keep it moist. You can let it skip a day. You can try and, indefinitely stress out a plant. One of my rules is like what doesn't kill the plant is gonna make it stronger. So I'm definitely stressing it out. But like lettuce, you gotta keep it wet. Watermelons, cucumbers, think about what you're eating. It's mostly water, right? Vining type plants though have this incredible ability to retain moisture because they have really deep roots. And so the roots go much deeper and they're able to ascertain water on a more regular basis because the root is really deep. And when we get to like talking about transplants, I'll talk about plants' roots so you have an understanding of this. But if you think about the soil, going back to the soil as the plant's stomach, now your plant's roots are into here, and we're watering less frequently, more deeply. We have deeper roots in the soil. The plants are doing a number of things. The plants are exchanging nutrients. They're bringing up water. They're bringing up nutrients on their own. But most importantly, they are exchanging nutrients with bacteria and fungus. 95% of all plants have formed a symbiotic relationship with the fungi in the soil, and they exchange resources. All right, so when I feed my soil, when I feed my plants, I'm feeding the soil. I'm no longer fertilizing my plants, I'm feeding my soil. And the reason why is because the plants have the ability to give the mushrooms sugar, all right? And they take the sugar and they excrete it out of the roots, all right? Where the roots are in the soil, the mycelium, which is these hyphae, they're strands of a mushroom plant. They come up and they meet the plant's roots, and where they meet, they exchange resources. Amazingly, the plants have the ability to code these sugars with carbons, and depending on the number of carbons, that tells the mushrooms exactly what they need. All right, so you could have one plant that is sickly and tired, and you could have another plant that's thriving. They're going to have both need different nutrients, and the mushrooms know exactly what to bring them. I have photographic evidence. If you guys ever want to come, I'll put it out there for one of my living soil talks, where I have photographed this process happening where the mushrooms heal plants. All right, they take sick plants and they heal them and they help them thrive. So what I want you to be thinking about is, how can I feed the soil, not necessarily my plants? All right, because the soil and the bacteria are going to do everything that your plant needs. You guys are getting soil tests. It's a very common thing. Everybody, whenever they hear about vegetable gardening, is going to be like, oh, go get your soil test, and you're going to find out everything that's in there, and you're going to know exactly what to do. Well, you're not. I'm sorry. You will find out everything that's in there. You absolutely will. But from that point on, you're going to be like a heron junkie chasing the dragon, because you're never going to get it balanced right. But guess what? In the forest, in nature, it's always right. It's always balanced. I say this, there's no pesticides, there's no herbicides, there's no fertilizers, but in fact there actually is. They're just not man-made. There's always a balance in the forest, and it starts with the mushrooms. The mushrooms are decomposing the matter that falls off of living organisms, and they're feeding it to the plants in exchange for sugar. Who doesn't love sugar? Apparently mushrooms love sugar too, just as much as us, right? And they're willing to work for it. Start feeding that process, and you will have better success in your garden. That's the most important thing I can tell you about your soil. Learn about the microorganisms that are in it and feed them. They're doing the work. They balance pH. They bring the right resources. They bring the right nutrients to each plant, depending on what each plant needs. I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen. That's all. I've seen it happen. I've done all these soil tests, and I have absolutely seen living soils not only heal plants, but help plants thrive after they've been healed, and then go on to their full potential, which is something that just generic compost and unhealthy farm soil can't do. So, yeah, it's amazing. All right, it's absolutely amazing. So the soil, treat it right in the sense that you're helping to foster biology in it. As much as you can, you're adding organic material to it. Guess what? Organic material has all kinds of bacteria on it. Wood, trees are incredibly fungal. So wood chips. The best thing you can do for your garden in terms of trying to foster this biology is to use fresh wood chips on all the pathways. So you put pathways down that are wood chips. The wood chips are full of fungal activity, and then the fungal activity goes down underneath the soil and up into your beds. So even if you're just gonna do this in your own plot, right? Just your plot, if you're gonna have any spot that's not gonna be grown on, use wood chips. It'll retain moisture and it'll also suppress the weeds, right? And then it introduces that fungal colonization, which is gonna help your plants thrive. All right, I'm gonna go to, all right, so we have water, soil. Ooh, this is a common question, manure. All right, people always ask me, should I put manure in my garden? You should put manure in your garden as long as it's aged and composted, like it's full. You can't put fresh manures in your garden. It'll make everything wonky because they're not decomposed, okay? And also, this is the next big question that comes up, wood chips. Everybody's like, what if you put wood chips, if I put mulch in my garden, isn't that gonna steal nitrogen? Because there's this idea out there that carbon, which is what wood and plant material are made from, takes nitrogen to break down, which is absolutely true. Only in your garden, when you put wood chips in there, the amount of surface area where the wood chips are touching the soil and are taking nitrogen to decay is nominal when it is in comparison to the benefits that are going to come from those wood chips being there in terms of moisture retention, weed suppression, and the introduction of the fungal colonies, because they're going to help your plants, okay? The amount of nitrogen that they take is totally negligible, especially given that the space between any organic matter laying on the surface of your soil and the soil is like happy town for biology. Everything is happening right there. This surface area between where things are decaying and your soil is where everything's happening. The worms are coming up to there. Worms will be buried into the ground 3 inches, but the tips of them will be up there underneath the wood chips because they're eating the bacteria. Worms, in fact, don't actually eat the things in the soil, or if you had a worm factory and you threw a bunch of banana peels in there, they don't actually eat the banana peels, they eat the bacteria that's eating the organic matter. So in compost or in cardboard, there are certain things that worms really enjoy, especially the bacteria that eat the glue that lives in cardboard. So if you ever want to collect worms, take a pizza box, put it out in your yard, put some bricks on it, maybe put some leaves under it and get it wet, and you'll have worms. They'll come because they're going to come because the bacteria is going to start eating that glue, and they're super attracted to that. All right, so I like to...
You talk about the wood chips or whatever. Now, in the pathways, what about on the plants? Because last year I had them all over my pumpkins and butternut, but they ended up actually, it was the first year I actually had a poor quality, and most of them died on me.
The squash.
The squash and pumpkin, yeah.
Did they...
Butternut,
Did the...
they did look great at the beginning of the season, but as it got later or whatever, they just kind of withered and died on me.
The pumpkins did, or the plants?
Pumpkins, the plants.
The plants that you...
Plants, I got a few little pumpkins, that was it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And then did you notice any white powders on the leaves or anything at all like that?
No.
So they just...
But I got it like up around the plants or whatever.
Yeah,
Wood
vine
chips.
borers. Did you look at that? Did the vine seem to like collapse from the inside out?
Probably a little bit, not much. I don't remember seeing a lot of that.
That's interesting, because,
Yeah.
so, if there wasn't any pumpkins, because there was
It was
poor
only a few,
pollination,
usually I've had a lot more, but, you know.
right?
It was very few.
And you've
Right
never
outside
had
those.
problems with them pollinating,
No.
so that's a good.
The same
that's a
general
good
area
thing.
that, you know,
Yeah.
I did that.
And then you didn't see any, you didn't see anything underneath, no pests eating them, and they just withered.
Yeah.
All right, you got me
Yeah, so-
stumped, because normally it
Yeah.
would either be powdery mildew, vine borers,
Yeah.
or squash beetles, or pollination, because if there's no pumpkins, the pumpkin plants, it'll just keep putting out leaves, but it's not necessarily
Yeah.
gonna thrive.
Yeah, no, the
Yeah.
plants just seem to kind of start withering and move around. So.
Interesting.
Once
You
a
were
week.
watering once a week, and
Generally, yeah.
yeah,
So,
'cause
yeah.
I mean, I've never had that. Like pumpkins either don't make fruit, which
Yeah.
I've had. That's very common. The squashes, in general, squashes and cucurbits are,
Yeah, I didn't get much of.
they don't pollinate well. Generally, that's just because the boy flowers are out before the girl flowers.
Yeah.
There's two different types of flowers. That's a big, but why it wouldn't just kind of stop growing if you were watering and it didn't have a disease. I
didn't tell us
I
what.
don't
Maybe
think
there
it
was
would
that
be wood
too.
chips, because if I had any inclination that the wood chips were an issue in that, I would think that the wood chips would have brought in a disease. It was too moist and you would have gotten some sort of rot or
Yeah.
mold or mildew because it was too moist
Yeah,
versus,
maybe, yeah.
and other than that, then the soil just wasn't rich enough.
Yeah, it's probably watering more than once a week though, but I mean, not much I know.
The one thing I can tell you about pumpkins that I've had success with is they really thrive in a partial decomposition state, where like a compost pile would be, where things are half rotted and half on the way. And I think that's part of their genetics, because if I think about a full pumpkin and all the seeds inside, in nature, that would have laid there, if nothing ate
Right.
it, and it would have kind of rotted in place,
Yeah,
right?
the ones at home that do that. or
Right,
some seed
and
come
then
up from
that
the
like
ground.
rotten state is where the vine would grow from, and then all the nutrients from the pumpkin would be feeding the plant, right? So actually, this is really great to think about. All plants bring up nutrients, right? So each plant has individual needs that it has. An oak tree has specific needs versus morning glory versus a pumpkin versus a tomato, and their roots are actively engaged in bringing up those minerals, and then they store them in their leaves and also in their fruit, right? The leaves are the storage houses of a plant, and the minerals and nutrients that they need, and plants are creating hormones and sterols, and like when they talk about like fruits that are good for us to eat, like black cherry or anything with those anthocyanino things, you know your doctor's talking about, like you're supposed to eat like deep leafy greens because they have these nutrients in them. Well, if the plants are storing that in it when the plant was growing, if nothing ate it, where would those leaves have gone? Right onto the soil where the next generation is going to grow. And I have this small theory that plants are conditioning the soil for themselves. So when I think about where I'm going to grow things, I'm like, geez, if I'm going to grow sage, I want to take a bunch of sage leaves and put it into that soil, because those sage leaves are going to contain the properties that would help any sage plant. And so as they decompose, it's going to be more favorable. And when I think about the forest, I think about a tree dropping its leaves onto the soil full of all of these particulars for that species and conditioning the soil for its offspring, right? So that way when its seeds land on the soil is right for them, and it's sending a signal to those seeds to say, hey, this is a good place for you to grow. It's actually been shown in a number of cases where mature trees will bring their roots up to their offspring and help them along by excreting the right things out of their roots to help feed them. There's this wonderful book called The Hidden Life of Trees. If none of you guys have read it, it's really amazing. It talks a lot about this stuff, about plants talking to each other. When it comes to growing my own food, if trees can excrete things to suppress growth, they can drop their leaves to promote growth, I'm thinking to myself that I really, really need to get into growing my own food. For one reason is that the farmers in this country have been tilling our land. They have been spraying it with herbicides, they've been spraying it with pesticides, and they have been growing these plants that are genetically modified to succeed in sterile conditions. And if I'm thinking to myself, boy, the plants are all talking to each other, in nature their roots are communicating with fungi, are these plants now becoming stupid? Like they don't know how to talk to each other? Are they not capable on their own of being able to bring the nutrients to themselves? Are they losing the ability to talk to the bacteria in the soil? And if the case, they're not bringing the nutrients up the same way. And there's a whole thing coming. You're gonna see this bioavailability of nutrients. There's a guy that created this tool that you take a little sample of your produce and you can look through it and it'll tell you the nutrient density of that food. Now I'm gonna tell you that, like, I might be wrong about this and you can all come and yell at me at some point, but I'm gonna tell you, if you go to an organic farm and they're embracing the soil biology and you examine their nutrient density, it's gonna be way better than the organic farm next door where they're just practicing regular old organic farm. The soil is alive, and the alive soil is what's bringing up the nutrients to the plants, right? So if you take a fertilizer, for instance, a fertilizer has 3 numbers on it. I'm sure you guys have noticed there's and 3 letters that correspond with those numbers, the N, the P, and the K, right? That's like saying that all that you need is vitamin A, B, and C, versus what we really do is like Centrum Silver, right? We want the whole kit and caboodle. We want the trace minerals, we want everything. But if you're only giving your plant the N, the P, and the K, how much of all of that other stuff are they really bringing up, right? So if my plant's stomach is the soil, what do I want to do? I want to put all of that stuff that I can in there. So when I make compost and I add things, I'm putting everything I can into it. So I go around my yard, and my neighbors probably think I'm nuts, but I'm not pulling the dandelions. I'm cutting them, tossing the head away, and taking the dandelion leaves and putting them on my compost pile. And there's a reason why I'm doing this. Dandelions have a really deep taproot that goes down into the subsoil where there's a whole nother host of minerals that it's bringing up into its leaves. Dandelions are repairers. In nature, there are plants that they're designed for when there's a disturbance and they're to restore the soil. Dandelions are repairers. There's a reason why we have them in our lawns. It's because our dirt in our lawns is quite literally that dirt. It's not soil, it's not alive, it's dirt, like something you'd sweep under the carpet and be like, rid of this stuff, right? And dandelions are like, oh, hey, this is a good place for us. We'll go down deep and we'll build it up and we'll put the minerals into our leaves, which will fall onto the surface of the soil and repair it and add those nutrients from down low up to the top. I've seen this happen in a lot in Boston where it was an empty lot and one day it was a cement pad with cracks. The next day I see there's little green things coming up, and then over time the wind blows dust and the leaves from the cracks of the little peat, they keep building up a little bit at a time, and the crack all of a sudden disappears, and now you have this mound of organic material where the dust and little leaves and the weeds and things have died, and before long now there's enough soil there to hold something like a small bush or maybe a little maple seedling starts popping up. And within 5 to 10 years, every crack in the parking lot or an empty abandoned lot is now growing something, right? And it builds up, and before you know it, it just shrinks. The area that was open, it just expands, and the parking lot gets covered and gets taken over. And all the plants had a purpose, right? They did what they needed to do. They repaired asphalt or they repaired cement so that they could grow. The same thing happens in your yard. So I'm collecting mullein, I'm collecting comfrey, chamomile, dandelions, burdock. Do you guys know what burdock is? Right? That, you know, that pesky weed that gets the little burrs on you? That's a power plant. Burdock is a power plant. In Japan, they grow burdock in all of the orchards to keep the soil loose because it has such deep roots. I'm seeing burdock root for $10.99 a pound, organic at Whole Foods, right? That's a weed. I'm telling you, you guys know it's a weed. You think of it as a weed. Those leaves are big and full of tons of minerals right on the compost pile, right? All of those things, those are what I'm collecting because I know they're bioaccumulators of nutrients. They're bringing all those nutrients up. I'm collecting those things and adding them to my compost. That way when I come back and put the compost onto my garden, now I have all those trace minerals that those bioaccumulators have been taking up, right? All right, so soil, watering, tools, buy the best tools that you can. USA made, please, if you can. Solid handles, plastic 2-piece ones are cheap, they're $1.99 and they break. You'll do way better buying a quality trowel. You don't need all kinds of crazy tools. Those things that like have tines and all of that stuff is junk. You don't need any of that. You just need your hands, a good trowel, maybe even just a screwdriver, right, for pulling weeds if you're going to be pulling weeds. But just solid handles. It makes a big difference. It's worth every penny. If you pay $19.99 for a solid handle trowel, it's gonna be better than a $1.99 one, and you'll buy 10 in the same amount of time if you get the cheap ones. So if it's in the budget, always buy the best solid tools you can. Same with soaker hoses and hose handles, solid brass. I know it seems like silly to talk about, but it actually will save you in the long run if you buy like a good quality gardening tool up front. They just last longer. All right, so what can I plant? Let's talk about plants. What can we grow around here? And when should we plant it? Okay. In Massachusetts, we generally start planting in around St. Patty's Day. That's the earliest I've ever planted anything is St. Patty's Day, and traditionally it's peas, spinach, cilantro, onions. If you're going from seed outside, you can start sprinkling them in March. Certain lettuces, kales, radishes, you can start sprinkling seeds for that stuff in March, okay? Provided that there's no snow on the ground and that the soil isn't super sloppy, all right? It's always a good idea to try and work in the garden when the soil isn't sloppy, all right? You don't want it to be like wet and because you can damage the soil structure. It's better when it's moist but not totally dry, okay? It just is easier on the soil than a sloppy wet day. So in the spring, if I can take a handful of soil and it doesn't like turn to mud in my hand, then I'm gonna plant cilantro for sure. The reason I'm planting these cool weather crops early is because plants are temperature sensitive, all right? And this isn't just the air temperature, it's the soil temperature. Spinach and cilantro don't like their feet to be really warm. When the soil warms, it sends the signal to the plant to produce seeds, all right? So bolting is what we call it when a plant goes to seed. In Massachusetts, spinach and cilantro are two of the most difficult things to grow because we have these crazy wonky springs where it's like cold and raw and gross, and then all of a sudden summer's here. And that's not what these plants want. They want it to be cool, right? So I've had the best luck with those two plants, allowing them to life cycle. And what I mean by life cycle is I mean I allow them to fulfill their life cycle. If the plant wants to bolt and produce seeds, I let it. And then what do? I let the seeds fall onto the ground. And so that way they grow when it's time for them to grow. The only time that I've ever gotten cilantro, like real cilantro, not like little bits and spindly things, and the same with like spinach, is when it's overwintered, because I allowed it to drop its seed, and in the fall it started to grow, and then those ones in the spring became full-on spinach. Like, I mean spinach. I'm not talking like baby spinach, but I'm talking like spinach leaves. That's the only time I've ever had it. So if you're gonna try and grow spinach and cilantro in Massachusetts, it might even be better to sow the seeds in the fall than it is into the spring. So that way, as soon as the soil is right for them, they'll start growing, right? Peas, obviously, you can plant them in the early spring. Most people say the reason we plant peas early is because they are sweeter when they ripen without the heat. That's up to you. If you want to plant peas in the summertime, honestly, go ahead. I haven't noticed that tremendous of a difference. But generally, everybody's like, am I too late for my peas? And I'm like, no. oh, the plants, I mean, you're too late for spinach and cilantro. Yeah, you are late. Everybody's always late for those two things. All right, so that's cool weather, right? We get cool weather crops. They don't like their feet to be warm. Broccoli is another one of those, okay? You guys are in community gardens, so you could grow broccoli, like you probably have the space. I don't generally recommend broccoli for home gardeners because they're enormous plants, and you get one head of broccoli or maybe some like side shoots. And for the amount of real estate that it takes and the difficulty it is of growing it, I tend to say let's leave that to the farmers. You guys do more high, like reward type things that are going to yield better for you, that are going to, you know, lettuces, things like that. Kale will continue to produce all year. It's a biennial, so it doesn't matter if it gets too warm. All right, so any plants, like early plants, you guys have questions about cool weather crops at all? All right, so we're gonna skip to the warm stuff now. All right, so everybody's favorite stuff, right? Memorial Day and after, all right? Tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, eggplant, basil, any of your more exotic type things, ground cherries, and then your cucumbers and things like that. Those are your warm weather crops. They want the soil temperature to be above 60 degrees. They want it to be really warm. I said Memorial Day, and I mean it. Anything that you think you're going to gain by planting before Memorial Day can be wiped out in an instant and mess up your whole entire season by putting it out too early if the temperatures overnight go anything below 50. A night in the 40s for a tomato plant is not good. It will stunt its growth. You can plant your tomato plant 10 days before Memorial Day. I can put mine out 10 days after Memorial Day when the conditions are perfect for that plant. Mine's going to win. It's going to do better because I'm giving it exactly what it wants, which is really warm soil. That little bit that you think that you're going to gain by getting it out there early, I'm going to make up for in the first 4 days that I have that plant in the ground because it's going to be thriving and it's going to have everything that it wants. Don't be in a great big rush, okay? Think about the life cycle of a plant also. And how long does it take for this plant to bear fruit, okay? So people ask me about cucumbers and I'm like, I plant mine on the 4th of July. And they're like, the 4th of July? And I'm like, yeah, well, it's really warm and that's what cucumbers want. So I plant my cucumbers on the 4th of July. And I don't get tremendous yields. I don't get crazy cucumbers, but that's okay. I know if you put them out earlier, you'll probably do a little better, but I like the fact that I can take my plot where I grew my peas. Peas are a legume. They work with bacteria in the soil to fix nitrogen. I cut the peas right at the surface of the soil and I leave the roots with all of that bacteria that put the nitrogen there, and then I plant my cucumbers because cucumbers love all that nitrogen. So I do double duty. Mm-hmm.
Do you mean by seed or by plants?
By seed.
I see.
Okay, we're going to talk about that. Richard's not going to like it when I tell you not to buy cucumber transplants, but and he buys them from me, so I shouldn't. He and I have discussed this at length, and you've done pretty well with the transplants that I've given you. So, but I also go out of my way to make sure that when Richard gets the transplants from me, that they're right at the right time. All right, and I'm going to explain this to you. Cucumbers and squash are taproot plants. They have really deep taproots, okay? And so by the time, and we've pulled them out of the pots and we've looked at this, right? So by the time that the cucumber has, or squash has its first set of leaves, which are called cotyledon, they're nondescript, they just are little lobes. By the time they have that, the root is already on the bottom of the pot. Right, so we use peat pots because peat pots allow the root to go through, but not every time does it go through, and sometimes it turns, and instead of going straight down the way it wants to, it curves, it goes a different direction. It could, if it was in a plastic pot, it would turn and go back right up the other side. And so now you have a plant that wants to have a root that's like this deep, going this and turning, and so you're going to have an inferior result. I've taken pot-bound cucumber plants, which means that they already have their leaves, their true leaves out. Like this has been in the pot for several weeks, and I've planted them and put a seed in next to it, and the seed always wins. All right, so if you can do transplants and provide that they're not going to become root bound, have at it, and it will work. And which is why I time it out for Richard, because I know that like any beyond that early cotyledon stage, we're going to have an inferior quality result, right? Also, on top of that, the seeds are cheap, and you get much better selection than what you're going to get at most garden stores. Fortunately for us on the South Shore, we actually have access to some really good growers around here between Holly Hill Farm and R&C Farms. There's some really good plants around. You guys have the place over in Bridgewater that has good starts. C.N. Smith, yeah, they do a farm sale. There's another Makepeace Farm, or it'll come to me. I'll think of it. But there's a cool new somewhere between here and Bridgewater. There's a group of people that have become. They're doing organic
And
and
there's
they're
the two
growing.
that you just mentioned, the first two.
All right, so R&C Farms is in Situate on Route 123. He's GMO free.
Oh, yeah, okay, yeah.
And he starts everything right there in Situate. And then there's Holly Hill Farm in Cohasset, and they're certified organic, and they start everything right there.
And I think they're selling Friday night.
They do for members. It's they pushed it back.
Last week, but maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, they pushed it back a week because of the cool. So it might be the 17th
Okay.
instead. But if you go to their website, and they have good starts, they have good prices too.
Do you know Langwater in Easton?
Yes,
Are they-
also, and he does awesome tomatoes.
I've gotten stuff there.
That would be a good
Norwell
place to go.
Farms, are they
And Norwell will
decent?
have a plant sale. Norwell Farms is gonna have a plant sale too, and they have good starts too. So when it comes to starts, how do we choose a start? Which one are we choosing? In general, you're gonna go for a stockier, thicker plant. Just because it's tall doesn't necessarily always mean the best. You're gonna look at the thickness of the stem. You want plants that have thicker stems and are shorter and squatter, because they're a higher quality plant. So something tall and thin is a plant that hasn't had enough light necessarily. And unfortunately, it doesn't often matter for the growers. If it's cloudy and cool like this spring, the plants are gonna get leggy. I've had gorgeous transplant tomatoes that were short and squat, and then you put them out into the greenhouse, and it's cloudy for it could be a full sun greenhouse. It doesn't matter. They'll just get leggy because it's cloudy, and they're a little you're forcing them into a greenhouse where the temperature is correct, but the day length and the amount of day that they're getting isn't quite right. So you can get leggier, but try and find shorter, squatter plants. Please don't buy root crops as a transplant, like beets or carrots or anything like that. If anybody ever tries to sell it, just say no. Just say no. You can get a packet of seeds and they're very easy to start, right? Carrots are not transplantable. Beets are transplantable, but like a 6-pack of beets, so you're gonna pay $1.50 for 6 beets? Really, when you can pay $1.50 for a whole packet of beet seeds, and each beet seed is technically a capsule, which contains at least 2 or 3 beet seeds, and you're gonna get 100 beet seeds in a packet for $1.50? All right, I'm just saying, I know farms are needing money, but you can do better than buying beet transplants and green bean transplants, for real. You know how many green beans you get from one bush plant? 20 to 30 beans. And you're gonna buy 6 plants, as transplants, or 1 bean plant? No, don't do that. Beans are wicked easy to grow from seed, and you're gonna give them everything that they want, right?
What
This
should
is the roots.
what should you plant, beet seeds?
Beets could go now. Beets are very tolerant. You could start beets in April, when you get to it, and you can keep doing those. You guys know what succession planting is? So where you plant a crop and you know that it's only gonna take 45 days to mature, and so then 10 days later, you plant another round of them, right? So like beets is a great example of that. Beets are an awesome crop that you should succession plant because like if you plant a whole packet of beets, then all of a sudden you're gonna have a whole bunch of beets. But I don't know what you're gonna do with a whole bunch of beets, right? So try, for instance, doing 1 square foot at a time. Do 12 beets, and then 10 days later, do 12 more. So that way over the course of the summer, you have some beets, not a whole bunch of beets. And the same thing goes with carrots and radishes. Carrots store better, but like what are you gonna do with 100 radishes? Right, so plant 3 or 4 radishes, and then a week later, plant 3 or 4 more. Radishes grow really fast if they're spaced out. This is important about root crops, okay? Spacing is critical with root crops, okay? Root crops have little hairs that come off of them, and when they're touching their neighbors, it sends them the signal that, I don't need to make big root, I need to make flowers. Why do I need to make flowers? I need to make flowers because that's how we cross up our genetics and produce seed. Every plant's goal is to produce a seed, right? That's what they want to do. Like every plant's goal is to produce a seed. Why? Because seeds are how they perpetuate the next generation, right? That's how they pass on their genes. So the thing we do is get in the way of that, right? We either stop them from producing seeds by taking the fruit off, or we mess up and we overwater them or under-nutrient them or something, like we just get in their way. Actually, we overthink them a lot of times. Plants definitely pick up on your energy. They know what signals you're sending. So if you're over your plant like, what's going on with you? Why aren't you growing? Guess what they know? They totally know, and they pick up on that. Just give them joy and give them love, and they'll do way better than if you're like fretting over them. Tomatoes are one of the smartest plants I've ever been around. I can't tell you the number of times I've had too short of a stake for the tomato, and it went way over the top of it, and then I had too big of a stake, and it just was like this was like, no, that's way too big. I'm not aspiring to that, and then we eat her out. Right? And then on top of that, when you tell them, I'm growing you guys for money, now they definitely know, and they're like, yeah, we're not going that tall, Todd. You thought that you were that guy that was going to grow a million bushel of tomatoes. Seriously, good vibes for your plants, so I know it sounds crazy, but good vibes for plants, like just believing that they're gonna grow. I threw some onions out in the side yard, just as compost, right? I threw them out, they're growing, right? I'm like, I didn't think anything of it, and now I realize, like, if you take the bottom of your onions and set them out in the yard, guess what? They grow. You get 2 for 1. Serious. I'm like, I already ate you, onion, but now I put your roots out there and you're growing and they're making 2, and I'm like, that's going to be 2 onions. If nothing else, I'm taking green onions from you. But I actually think that it's going to grow and make onions. I'll report back to you, I will, I'm going to let you know, but I seriously think that we're going to start getting onions from these, just putting them out there like that, right? Life cycling again, allowing your onions to flower and drop the seeds, and same with lettuce. You'll always be a lettuce if you let one lettuce flower, right? If you've not allowed certain things to flower yet, you gotta try it. Lettuces, arugula, radishes, Swiss chard. Swiss chard produces edible pods that are better than the actual leaves. They're sweeter, they're less beet flavored, right? So thinking that your plant is gonna be done just because it goes to seed, let it do that. Let it drop its seed. Lettuce is a dandelion. Dandelions spread like a weed. All right, now I'm stuck, Richard. Wait, dandelions are weeds, and they're completely edible, right? And lettuce is actually a member of the dandelion family. All right, yeah, seriously. That's a head scratcher, right? Because dandelions are a weed and lettuce is edible. All right, sorry, I'm off track. I just caught myself in one of those ones. It's just unbelievable, right? So a lettuce plant will drop so many seeds, they fly off into the air and you'll just have lettuce. Oh wait, this is a big deal. Summer squash. Summer squash is super susceptible to vine borers. Vine borers' life cycle early in the season. When I had my first community garden plot in Situate, this guy, he had a big double wide, it was 10 feet by 20, and he planted the whole entire thing with onions and garlic. And then in August, he came in and he harvested all the onions and garlic, and he made these like volcano things that were about this wide, about that tall, and there was a rim on the top like a volcano, which he then planted squash seeds into. And I'm like, what? Like, it's August, how is this possible? This guy's planting squash right now. 4 weeks later, he had summer squash everywhere, right? And so I started thinking about it, and I started reading the packet, and the packet of the summer squash seed says it only takes 60 days. So I'm like, August 1st, September, wow, it doesn't even freeze here until the middle of October. And this guy's stuff's going nuts. Everybody else's squashes are all eaten up and full of bugs and succumbing to the heat. And they planted them on Memorial Day, and then it hit me, hence summer squash, as in plant them in the summertime, and they'll grow great, and they'll miss the vine borders. This is like, you guys have so much more time in your community garden plot than you really think, right? Because right now, we're at May, so we have 30 days in May, and then we have June and July. That's 90 days. So many things will grow in 90 days, and that still leaves you all of August and September, right? So, I mean, just like think about that for a minute. Like, look at some of the seed packets and read how long it takes for things to grow, and be like, wow, from Memorial Day until August, I have quite a bit of time. Why am I quitting on these summer plants when I could have done some more earlier plants and then done summer plants? You could have done a bunch of radishes, beets, and beans by August, and then you could put your summer squash in. You could condition the soil with what you grow in the early part of the year to feed your summer plants. Right now, winter squash, this isn't the same thing. Right, winter squash, butternut squash, pumpkins, those are 120 days minimum, so you actually do need to plant them sooner because they take that much time, right? Tomatoes, also 120 days, some of them are shorter, but like all the real good heirlooms are at least 120 days, right? So those are the ones that, like, things that you're gonna really wanna try and like work on if that's your thing. In your community garden though, like thinking, butternut squash would actually be a really good thing if you can contain it to your bed, because it's low maintenance and it produces something that you can keep for the whole year, and it doesn't have a ton of pest problems, but they're enormous, right? Does anybody have a bed that can contain a butternut squash plant?
That's a community garden.
At the community garden, you guys are big, because in my experiences, those things have gone into my neighbors, and then they get into the aisles and they end up getting mowed. They got mowed, right? Or they got eaten by the neighbor that neglected the vine borers, right? I did grow pumpkins in a community garden once, and it was a lot of work. It was a lot of work, because I had to go in and like hand pick bugs every day, because like other community gardeners were being irresponsible. Sorry, I'm still bitter about that.
Well, actually, the pumpkin and stuff, that's actually a separate section that we added in.
Right,
It's a little more away from the other ones.
You guys, so, and that's the thing with pumpkins, though, you guys could grow the pumpkins in one area for
Well,
everybody.
that's what we
And
kind of
everybody
tried to
could get a
do.
pumpkin, yeah.
So that way you can plant them over there and they don't take the room that you need in your regular garden. so.
Yeah, and they're super low maintenance. Once you get them going, like pumpkins really don't need a lot. If you do field pumpkins, like the Connecticut field pumpkin, if you just take like a pile of straw, some manure, maybe a little seaweed, and mix that up with some leaves and grass and stuff and make a mound and throw pumpkin seeds in it, forget about it. You don't have to water them. I've gotten tons of pumpkins that way. You just let them go. All right,
Todd,
so, yeah.
Todd, when you were talking about the borers, can you touch on, that's one of the big problems down there.
Oh, you guys have the vine borers.
Yeah, can you talk
Okay.
about those maggots too, if there's a way to prevent?
Ooh, pepper magnets?
Maggots.
In the roots?
No, they something lays the eggs on the bell peppers, and then they hatch, and they're eating them when they rot
You
from.
got me, I've never heard of such a thing. I've never heard of pepper maggots, ever. Wow. That you've got me. I've heard of root maggots,
Yeah, no.
but not pepper magnets. Maggots. God, I'm having trouble with that one. Vine borers are tough. The life cycling thing is one of the best things you could do, is because they're out early in the season, because they're out when they want to bore into the vine. So if it's the couple of things that I've heard of, they use aluminum foil, and they wrap aluminum foil around the vine so that the borers can't get in. The most effective thing I've ever done, and this is for long vining type things, is not to do just one place where the roots are going in. So about 3 feet down the vine, I take a pile of compost and I pile it over the vine, and that creates a second place where the plant roots in. And then if the borers go in, it's beyond where they go in, and so it keeps growing from there. But life cycling seems to me to be the best thing, is so when they're done, then plant. But if you're doing the winter type ones, do the double rooting and aluminum foil if you want to try that, because they can't like right at the base where it comes out of the ground, and wrap the foil around it, and then they can't get into it.
Mary, you had good luck with milk on your leaves for the powdery mildew, am I correct?
I did, and I did it both ways. I also made like a jug of milk, of very diluted milk, and poured it right into the root system.
Yeah.
But I was also
Yeah.
spraying all the
For the
leaves.
squash.
For
I
powdery
on
mildew.
my butternut, on every, yeah, all the vine.
That
All the
worked for
vine
me
plants.
For milk.
It was
Yeah.
powdered milk
Yeah.
Mhm.
and water.
Well, you use
And I
powdered
poured it
milk.
right in the roots.
Yeah.
Actually, I
That's
had,
what you
I think,
do.
the jugs.
Should make it up.
In the
The
field,
jug that
you
was
use
right there.
powdered
the
milk
line
mixed
put it in the
it.
jug.
Yeah, it worked for the powdery
We have
mildew.
the squash.
It did.
I got
This was
20.
preemptive.
And I got
We were
laid
doing
off.
it before or
No,
after?
I had
It
it,
just came.
and I
It
treated
still
it
worked.
with milk, and it worked,
Really?
yeah. This woman, there was
No, I've
there was
heard this,
another
I
woman that
know.
told me.
My only thing with the powdery mildew is that any type of liquid application to control it, I saw the powdery mildew collecting on droplets of water and dripping down onto the soil, and so then now I'm like, well, it's in the soil. It was probably there to begin with, but I'm like, I don't wanna make it worse.
Right.
So generally, I've just cut the leaves off if they were really infected and thrown them away, and actually in the garbage.
Just
Yeah.
jumping back to the vine borers, you said wait it out, so when would we
That's,
plant?
yeah, and
Give us a
later,
date.
past July, if you actually Google the vine borer life cycle in Massachusetts, it'll give you specific dates. That's how I kind of found out, it's after July, right, so someday, and so when they come, they lay their eggs in the ground, and the larvae grow, and then the bugs come out, and when the bugs come out of the ground, they're looking for the vines, and that happens to be that they come out of the ground around Memorial Day and persist until 4th of July. And once they're done with that cycle of coming out of the ground and looking for a new place to lay eggs, that's when you can
That's
plant
what it's
again, right? But this is the winter squash.
Right, no, for
This is just
zucchini.
zucchini and yellow squash, yeah. Cocazelle. Actually, Cocazelle is a really good one. If you guys haven't got it as a zucchini, Cocazelle is really good for Massachusetts. I've had tremendous luck with Cocazelle.
Just like the strike pump.
Yeah, it's just really and they last a long time, they last way longer, after you harvest them, they produce really well. I haven't had much disease problems with those. I really like that Cocazelle variety, as opposed to Black Beauty or whatever Black Beauty. Well, that's also kind of that, there's that deep, the dark zucchini, Dark Star, that classic.
Was eggplant a 2-year plant? I asked that because my wife kept coupling the window, and she had one that's like this tall or whatever, that survived the winter.
It's
the big
not,
window.
no,
Looks
it's
like it's doing
not
flowers again.
biennial, no, it's a, but more than likely wherever it comes from, somewhere in South America, it probably grows as a perennial.
Yeah.
So it would last in your windowsill, because I've got pepper plants in the sunny windowsill.
Yeah, she had a
pepper
couple of
plants
peppers,
keep
and they
growing.
haven't, right, they kind of died on her eventually.
Yeah, they like, but they'll, yeah.
I know
they're
pepper's
not
supposed to be
gonna-
able to
see,
do your
This is
thing.
about the day length too, see, because, so it's like, I could bring in some pepper plants from outside, but the day keeps getting shorter and shorter and shorter, which the plant is like, well, we already made our flowers, like the length of the
She had
day.
artificial lights going on with something too.
Yeah, I've done that. You could keep a pepper plant along for a long time. You'd be better off doing strawberries. Strawberries are something that will continue to bloom inside, and you can pollinate them with like a paintbrush.
I think these are ones that even my wife and my daughter tried to do by seed, and they just didn't get big enough to go out, and they ended up being late ones.
And so now they're
Keep them
house
inside,
plants.
so yeah, we just have to keep them in the window.
There's no reason why you couldn't keep a pepper plant or an eggplant as a house plant. I have tomatoes growing in a couple of, like, someone must have thrown a cherry tomato or something in one of my house plants, because there's tomatoes growing. Books, this is big. Couple books, all right. My personal favorite, Crockett's Guide to the Victory Garden. I tell everybody this, it's where I've learned so much from. It's based on the television show that was filmed in Cambridge, so all the zone information in it is accurate to where we're growing for temperatures, and it's laid out 1 month at a time. It's called Crockett's Guide to the Victory Garden. It's 12 months. It tells you what to plant, what to transplant, what special events are happening. For Massachusetts gardeners, if you've not been there, you gotta get into it, you gotta read it. There's one caveat, he says things in there like to stave off the ravages of root maggots, a healthy dose of diazinon is applied. There's no such thing as a healthy dose of diazinon, just ignore that stuff. His techniques are awesome, they're really awesome, and he'll say, like, we were a television show, so like when I pull, I can't pull something out of the ground on TV full of a bunch of maggots, so like, you know, they had read Rachel Carson, but they knew they were on TV, so, that's an absolute must. And then the second, my favorite is, Carrots Love Tomatoes. Carrots Love Tomatoes is a little bit of a next level, but it's all about companion planting. This woman, Louise Riot, wrote it. She was a farmer in Oklahoma for her whole entire life. And it's a lot of awesome anecdotes from her experience, but just charming things like, I have a friend, she'll say that always grew her tomatoes on metal poles because the metal conducted static electricity, and the static electricity helps the plants grow better. And she'll like go into things like that are really cool. Snow water, one of the things I learned from her was that snow water molecularly is different than rainwater. The way that the water droplets form around the dust for rain versus the dust for snow is completely different, and plants actually thrive from the molecular difference between snow water and rainwater. So Carrots Love Tomatoes, really good. And then the third one, this is just a little bit like more out there. There's a book called Sepp Holzer. His name is Sepp Holzer. It's called Permaculture. It's Sepp Holzer's Guide to Permaculture. Fabulous stuff in there about planting herbs, planting plants for their inherent pest protections, and then collecting certain things and making teas from them. And he has really cool growing techniques and stuff. But Sepp Holzer's Permaculture is really good too.
Couple questions. My home garden, I noticed my potatoes were up today.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as deer, like, what can I plant that they won't eat?
Deer don't like holly. They don't like garlic. They don't like onions. They don't like mint. They don't like anything with thorns on it.
I have onion out there, or it's up part of the out of the ground.
Yeah.
Right?
So one of the coolest things I've ever seen someone do is to take garlic and plant it every foot around the edge of a raised bed. like one all the way as a perimeter, because you can reach through it. Garlic grows tall, and so it doesn't take up space this way, so they could still reach through, and it kind of made a natural barrier. I'm always moving garlics, chives, mint, the Egyptian walking onions. I'm always pushing those to the outside of my garden.
Those are horrible, those Egyptian walking ones.
They do.
They're taking over my.
Yeah, they do. They
One of my guys.
I know.
At home.
But they're super delicious right now. Like at this time of the year, they're so sweet, so they're really good. Egyptian walking
All you
onions.
need is like a green onion?
Nodding onions.
You need to eat them as a green onion?
Yeah, that's how I use them, as a green onion. They're super sweet compared to other onions. It's anecdotal at the best. The best thing I've ever had for deer work was fishing line. Fishing lines as a barrier. So as long as it's somewhere where you're not gonna go, you do like a Z, right? Like a Z of fishing line across from one tree, back to the other, and then like this, and you do it at this height. They can't see it, and so when they walk into it, it spooks them and they don't like it. So that's one thing I've had success with. The other thing to keep in mind is that deer lack depth perception, right? So while a deer could stand next to an 8-foot fence or a 6-foot fence, I've seen on YouTube 6-foot fences, and literally jump right over it without running. If there's something at the base of the fence and something on the other side of the fence, it messes up their perception. They don't know how big the fence is, and so they're less inclined to jump over it. So if you have your fence planting something like sunflowers on the outside that's tall and a foot or two from the fence, creates that depth, right? That they're not gonna be able to perceive as well, so they'll be less inclined to go.
It's
So
a
you
lifetime
mix
of
it.
learning.
What?
A lifetime of learning.
Yeah, it takes a while, but also just to be mindful of where the deer are. Watch how they enter your yard. Because instead of trying to take and keep them out of your whole yard, you might be able to just shun them this way by a selective, planting or using some fishing line, just because if this is their primary way they've been coming, now they're coming that way and they keep getting annoyed, they're gonna go the other way, right? And you might be able to,
in my backyard, but they don't touch my garden.
I lost every eggplant, tomato, just.
They'll eat everything.
Just everything.
yeah.
Everything.
I've had good luck with clover being around and keeping bunnies away, because the bunnies eat the clover. But when it comes to a hedgehog, like not a groundhog, or a deer, like, you're at their will, so it's like either have an 8-foot high fence, or like push them. And like, think about that, like almost like a hedge. What can I plant to force them to go a different direction? Right, because they're pretty much creatures of habit. They kind of follow the same path all the
Yeah,
time.
that's what I was trying to get to, is that, like, I literally have a deer run in my backyard, and you can see that they walk down my yard, the same path every single time, and because my raised beds are closer to the house, they don't
just go by.
They just walk on by and don't
Yeah.
even bother them.
We have one in ours. I know they're going through there because I haven't really seen them. I've only been in the house a short time, but they're not eating my hostas, which is really
Usually what I
interesting
like to eat.
because I know that's like salad.
Yeah.
Technically, a good amount of varieties of pasta are actually edible for us, right? So if we like it, guess who also likes it? The deer, right? And if you think about that, tomato leaves are actually edible. This is a great.
I thought tomato leaves were poisonous.
A small amount of tomato leaves added to your tomato sauce, deeper, richer flavor, right? Most plants are edible that we can eat, like, except for peppers and eggplants, tomatoes, but carrot leaves, beet leaves, radish leaves, basil leaves, like all the herbs, like anything like that, they're all actually even cucumbers are edible. The little cucumber leaves, and they taste like cucumbers. But once they get bigger, then they're bitter and they don't taste so good. But the first couple that come out are actually taste like cucumber. But after that, then they get like furry and not good. So I Irish Spring, that's the only other one I've heard. I don't know if you've tried the Irish Spring, so.
We did, we had it all the way around. Before we had our big fence at the community garden, we had it all the way around, and they loved it.
They go
And
right
I think they
over
took
it.
showers in
They
it.
go right over it, but in the case of somebody that has a deer run, you might be able to put it at the entrance of the run to your area and see if that worked. I just didn't like it. A lot of it is the sense of things that deer, they don't want to get it on them, right? So you want it to be wide enough that they have to walk in it for them to be able to get to what they want. Because if they have to walk in something stinky like an onion or a mint or garlic or soap, they're not going to want to do that because then they're going to track it with them. And they're highly organized by the way they smell. So if they start reeking like garlic, it's not ideal for them.
Down at Plymouth Plantation, and they planted, just came over when the pilgrims came, they plant onions all the way around every one of their gardens and garlic, and they never have trouble with hedgehogs or deer.
I'm in the process of doing, I've also, in terms of that life cycling thing I keep talking about, onions are fascinating to watch grow perennially. And most onions are perennials. Shallots are perennials, garlic are perennials, and they make this like mat. And I just envision like whole sections of prairie and field as like mats of onions where it's like an onion, an onion, an onion, an onion, an onion, an onion. You just go in and take an onion whenever you need an onion. Because they literally will make like this mat of onions. You gotta let your onions grow. You do.
And you want to get them in early, before, you want them well established before you plant it inside.
Yes, also don't buy onion sets. The little onion bulbs that they sell at the hardware stores and stuff are junk. You're gonna do way better buying live plants. I mean, you guys might have gotten onions. I've never gotten real full-size onions from onion sets. I just haven't.
Live plants.
Live like onion plants, like Johnny sells bundles of onions. You get like a bundle of 75 onions for like, it's cheap, like they're pennies, and they just ship them to you when they're alive, and all you do is stick your finger in the ground and stick the onion in, and away you go. Versus the onion sets are the bulbs. Those are immature onions from the year before, but the bulk of onions grown for sets are grown in Texas, and they're not day length sensitive. We have to have a specific type of onion in the north because we have longer days, and the ones down there are grown for Texas. And they still sell them at Home Depot and Lowe's and wherever else up here. That's why you don't get big ones. You can, but it doesn't.
Where you get the onions that you said?
Oh, those live onions? Johnny Seeds out of Maine sells live onions. They're actually a great price. It's a really good deal. I've had tremendous, like you can get, they only have a few varieties. They have like an Alyssa Craig, and then they have a purple one. But they're both like candy, I think. But like if you start your own onions from seed, you have to do it in February because they grow really slow. So it's just like call up Johnny and get a whole bundle of them. You know, I think it's 75 plants for like $5 maybe. It's not really a ton of money because it's just an onion. Yeah, better yet, just start cutting your onion pods off and putting them out. I'm sorry, if I were to tell the people, I think the best way that you should grow tomatoes is to take your favorite tomato you ever had and just take it and put it out in the garden, and then you'll have awesome tomatoes. But I just, actually I can say that now because I'm not in the nursery business as much as I was. So some of the best tomatoes I've ever had were just totally like, they came up and they sprawled all over and.
Could you plant onions in a mulched area, like if you weren't gonna eat the onions, like say
Yeah.
surround your arborvitae's with onions?
Yeah. Yeah, oh, that's, yeah, deer love arborvitae.
Yeah, it's bad.
It's terrible, they love those things. They
I
do.
feel like
I
the
hate
foot's
the smell of
skinnier,
those.
is up where the deer, until
I-
where they
oh,
can
man, I
reach,
got
they're way
photos.
skinnier.
Super, I can't
gotta
say
go
on
out
film,
and
I
get
can't tell you about that on film, but the boy deers love arborvitae. They like scratch it with their, and then they eat it all the way up, and all you get is a tuft on the top.
Yeah,
Yeah, onions all the way at the base, but you're gonna have to get it so that they have to walk in them,
right.
right? Yeah, or just don't plant arborvitae.
Yeah, no, they're
Near where
there,
the
they're
deer
already
is.
there.
Well, this is like if you live next to the forest,
Yeah.
right? Like how many of us have lettuce bowls and pastas like on a stone wall that they just walk right up to and they're just like, hey, nice, thanks for putting that there for me. You know, like they love that stuff. And no netting is gonna fix that. They push it down,
And there's a will, there's a way.
yeah, exactly, right? And the plants know what they wanna do, we just kinda get in the way. 9 out of 10 times if I've had a problem with a plant in my garden, it was because I was not letting the plant do what it wanted to do, which was produce a seed. And I was just standing in the way, I was either overwatering it, or mostly I was overwatering. I think that's one of the most things that people do is overwater. Great for you to know, if you don't know, when a plant turns lime green, like lime green from the deep leafy green, when it turns lime green, that's an indication that it's running out of nutrients. So it needs to be fertilized. When a plant starts turning yellow, it means that it's too wet. Like 9 times out of 10, if your plant starts turning yellow, it's because you're overwatering it. Always follow the new growth on your plants, and what I mean by that is the tips of the plants, where the growth is coming out. If the new growth is healthy and green and lush, that's usually an indication that the plant is healthy. Focus on that. Before you start worrying if a plant is dropping leaves or there's spots on the leaves or whatever, focus on the new growth, right? Plants will use their leaves for nutrients. They store nutrients in their leaves, and so if they come into a moment when they need something, it's totally normal for them to rob the nutrients from their leaves and then drop them, right? That's not that you're doing anything wrong, that's the plant doing what it needs to do, which is to feed itself, to make a seed, right? Which most of the time is in its fruit or in its flower, right? We covered watering. Oh wait, seeds, I want to just talk about seeds. Seeds, okay? It doesn't matter if they're organic necessarily. By the time you grow it, it's going to turn into something that is going to be far from any chemical that was on that. Better seed companies, though, for the planet, yes, using organic seed companies is a good idea, right? Because they're going to be more responsible and better stewards of the land. In your house, if you have a packet of seeds and you keep it at fairly consistent temperatures in a cool, dry place, they can last up to 7 years on average, okay? If you put them in the refrigerator, they can last 7 to 14 years. If you put them in the freezer, they can last indefinitely, okay? As long as they're frozen, they will last. The one caveat with using frozen seeds, if you take the whole packet out and let them unthaw, you gotta use the whole packet, because then now they're like good to go, right? And you can keep them out of the freezer, but your germination rates are gonna go down. So what I do is, for the things that I'm saving in the freezer, I take the packet out, I take the seeds that I need real quick, and I put it back in. And they'll last indefinitely, okay? I've had seeds that lasted just in my basement in a shoebox, and I'm getting germination off of them after 10 years. So they'll last a long time. The one thing I can tell you though is onion seeds and marigold seeds don't really last that long. But other than that, most of them will last long. And save your own seeds. Also this too, within 2 growing seasons, the genetics that are expressed in a seed that you save are starting to express your growing conditions. So if you grow green beans in the same place in your yard, after 2 seasons, the genetics that are in those bean seeds are already starting to be adapted to your particular soil type, your particular growing region. So seed saving is really good. Beans are one that's pretty easy to save. I wouldn't save squash seeds. They get mixed up really easily. They get cross-pollinated and you'll end up with like a pumpkin or things like that, which we've had.
I had one of those grow my compost.
Yeah, you get weird. Yeah, squash tend to like go weird pretty quickly. I've even had a plant that produced zucchini throughout the season, and then halfway through the season started producing pumpkin meat. And we were growing lots of pumpkin in the yard, And I still am not 100% positive about this, but like my original reaction was is that somehow the pollination happened from the pumpkins to the zucchinis, but that is impossible because that would have to be expressed in the seeds that would have been saved. So at some point during the season, the zucchini morphed and kind of like hermaphrodited or something, turned into a pumpkin plant. Like it just like changed, like somehow. All right, any questions? Is there any other basic gardening area that, container gardening? Does anybody have any questions about container gardening?
I will, I'm going from having an open garden to raised beds.
Mm-hmm.
Any suggestions? Like I said, this is my very first year with it. With
So
the
you're
raised
like in a
beds.
4x8 or like something?
Yeah, 4x12s.
Mm-hmm.
And I have 4 of them. What
Yeah.
is the biggest thing I should be aware of, I guess?
With raised bed gardening, you have obviously the benefit that it's up,
Mhm.
which is huge. You also get better drainage. You also get to create the soil yourself, so you're gonna have the opportunity to create a really great soil in there. The one thing to remember is it's still a container, right? And so when you water containers, if the surface of the soil is really dry, the water sits there and often it runs down the sides and not into the soil. And even in my 4x8 raised beds, I still have container-like conditions happen sometimes, where like if I water a pot, and I water the pot, and I'm like, all of a sudden it's running out the bottom, and I'm like, woo, I did it awesome, it's really good. But if I go back in a few minutes and I pull the plant out of the pot, I'll see that the only this much is actually moist and the rest is wet. And the reason is because there's surface tension, right? The surface tension inhibits the water from going into the soil, but when it sits there, it breaks after time. So when I water, I always water from one plant. I water it, and then I move to the next, and I move down, and then I go back and I do it again. And I love to make donuts around my plant, so I get like a little bowl. When someone was talking about wood chips being next to the plants or something, I never put any type of mulch material that I'm using, straw, grass clippings, which tomatoes love grass clippings as a mulch, or wood chips. I'm never putting it at the base of the plant. I'm always pulling it back and creating a ring. One, I don't want that material touching the base of the plant because it could rot it. And two, I love that I make a little bowl so then when I water, I can fill that up and then it sits there and holds in place instead of spilling off across the garden. And then I know that it's gonna go into the plant there, but I know that the surface tension is gonna exist. And just this little bit amount of water is not nearly enough. So I water it, I move to the next one, and I go down, and I come back and I do it again. And then I do the cake test, all right? So the cake test, like when you bake a cake and you stick a toothpick into the cake, if it comes out clean, the cake is done, it's time to take it out. You do the same thing with your finger into the soil. When you stick your finger into the soil, if your finger comes out clean, and the soil is dry, it's time to water it. If the soil sticks to your finger, then it's moist and it's not needing to be watered, right? So I'm constantly out there just sticking my finger in the soil to see what the conditions are because I want to know if it's actually moist to the touch. Because plants don't just take moisture from the water in the soil, they also take it from humidity. Right, so they have the ability to draw it out of the soil in the form of humidity as well, which is, if you grow stuff in containers, you'll absolutely notice when it's really humid outside, it takes longer for your containers to dry out, right? And the same thing would go in the soil. So if you're in a raised bed, it's still technically a container, you water it and it just flows off, and I've definitely had it running out the side of the beds. So it's important to remember that. Also, remember that once your plants grow, they're like an umbrella, and they sheathe water off. So just because it rains really hard doesn't necessarily mean that your container got watered as well as you think, right? Because the plant can sheath some of it off and it doesn't all go. If it's obvious, if it's a super driving rain, it's gonna get down in there, but just like sprinkles and stuff, the plants will actually shed quite a bit. So
Thank you.
And it's not finite, that's the one thing I just like, with containers, it's not finite, it's like, it does need to be replenished, right? So leave the roots from your plants there, when you, and done in the fall, if you cut the plants, and I cut my plants right at the base of the soil, and leave the roots. The roots decay, and they turn into organic matter, which feeds the soil, but better than that, where they were all at, all those are channels for microorganisms, critters, air, water to flow through the soil. They've done tons of tests on this that have shown that tilled soil that gets turned over actually absorbs less water than soil that hasn't been. So as much as you would think that because it was fluffed up, that it was going to be able to absorb more and retain, it's not the case. It actually just runs away faster versus soil that is intact and has the roots there. It absorbs and holds the water longer. I know tilling is a tough one. Tilling, when you can get yourself off of tilling, if you can, it's a big deal. Not because I'm afraid that you're going to be losing topsoil or like killing everything. It's that disturbance that it causes is unnecessary. When you plant in and dig your holes for your transplants, you're fluffing the soil enough. If you've been taking care of your soil, there's no reason to till it every year. The only time I ever till is when I need to incorporate something that is in mass that I really want throughout the whole soil, right? Because like certain things are gonna, like I add certain things that I know I want in there that are gonna help the plants at all levels of the soil, either moisture retention or for nutrient purposes, then I'll till it, but after that I'm done. I want it to be like the forest, right? Actually, most of how I gain knowledge from my garden is by scent, and I'm after a certain smell. And that smell is when I go into the forest and I go off of the trail and I turn over a log and you get hit by that rush of like earthiness, that's what I want when I pick up my soil. That's what I'm going for. And the only way that I found that is that the soil in the forest is undisturbed. It's just layers upon layers of decomposed organic matter, and it smells different than anything else that I've ever gotten in a bag or from a compost pile, except for ones that I made myself. Also, get good at making your own compost. Sorry. If you can, we could do a whole entire composting talk. Like, I'll come out and we could do all composting for you guys so you can really get good at that. Because the best thing I've ever put in my garden is my own compost. Except for love.
You mentioned earlier
Weeds.
with the,
Sorry, he was.
Yeah, I just had one question about the compost, and it was about, you know, the organic stuff that you put in, like, you put a lot of bananas in, right? So now I'm thinking I got a lot of potassium.
Mm-hmm.
So if I just use that and put it in a plant, how do I tell that plant doesn't get, you know, way above?
Too much potassium?
Too much.
There are actually indications of too much potassium. The plant's leaves will do things.
Yeah.
They'll either curl, or they'll get purple, or they'll get veiny. So you can figure that out. If you were gonna grow bananas, I would recommend composting tons of bananas, right?
Yeah.
If you're not gonna be growing tons of bananas, just make sure you're adding lots of other stuff too. So don't just stop with bananas, do
Yeah.
everything. Right, everything that you possibly can. All the weeds are awesome to add to your garden without the seeds, right? So when the dandelion has the head on it, I'm not putting the head into the compost, I'm only putting the leaves in, right?
Just around and cut all those heads, that's a lot of work.
I do, but I look at it as it's a free resource, right? I'm eliminating the flower, right? Because I'm not willing to leave dandelions in my yard. I love them, I think they're beautiful. But I'm not willing to leave dandelions flowering in my yard because I'm afraid of what my neighbor's gonna do. Because I don't trust them to not spray the heck out of their yard. So I pull dandelions because I know they're going for a perfect lawn. So I'm trying to avoid contributing to that. So I just pull, I go around and I snap the heads off and throw them in the garden, in the garbage. Like I just throw them away or put them in a bucket and let them rot for a while. And then just toss them, and I just use the leaves, or eat the leaves. I mean, we're not real collard green people up here in the north, but dandelions added to your collards is fantastic.
I get an offbeat question, actually, that's not exactly no gardening, but as far as like, I have like 3 dogs at the house now. I have a pile of the manure that's back behind, it's actually on the.
The dog?
Yeah, from the dog.
Oh, that's not manure.
No, well, what I mean is the fact that you hear this stuff from the thing talking about the fact that, you know, you shouldn't leave it on the ground or whatever, that there's poison in the water,
Yeah.
all this, I mean, what,
It has E. coli in it, a lot of it, anything that eats meat.
doesn't any animal thing, like the deer, the coyotes, I mean,
Sort of, and not.
why are the dogs any more than
Because
any
they
other
eat
animals
meat.
out there?
Because they eat meat. It's the meat. It's the food that they're eating. The meat is what has the E. coli in it. There's E. coli on everything. We have E. coli all over us. There's E. coli in your garden, you know, it's out there. It's even in the soil. But for whatever reason, animal waste from meat eaters is way more loaded with it. It's probably because it's in our guts. We probably need it to digest the meat. That would be my guess, because that's probably why we have E. coli.
It's nowhere near my garden or whatever, but.
If you fully composted it though, like, honestly, yeah, it would probably work great. I mean.
So it could go in with the compost as well.
I wouldn't put it into my compost, but if I was gonna do a specific.
He just reversed himself. He just reversed himself.
No, I'm saying compost just the dog manure separately.
Yeah.
Like in its own area
Yeah.
and try and do that. I'm not opposed to the idea.
I mean, around the regular, like bushes or whatever.
Yeah, versus mixing it in with my, where I'm making my vegetable scrap
Right.
compost, because I don't wanna mess it up. And I don't know if it would.
And be very careful, because the farmer that does cutting up there does not want to come up there anymore because he's afraid of the dogs poop up there and it'll kill his cows.
So what's this, oh, you talked about,
Dogs. Dog
Dogs
poo is
walking
bad for
dogs.
cows.
It makes the cows fertile. I'm sorry, opposite, sterile.
Oh, does it? Interesting.
Yeah, they
It's
get,
not good.
Huh, that's weird.
it's sterile.
I've never heard
It's
that.
a female sterile.
unfortunately, a lot of people aren't good about.
There is a tremendous amount of human waste that is used as fertilizer though. I mean, all over this country, they spray human waste on fields for food.
Oh, really?
Absolutely. Oh, yeah, that's not a big secret. That's out there. So, yeah, that's a big, I've actually been asked that question more than once. How do you feel about human waste as a manure? Because it's coming, it's a big, it's out there. There's a lot of us and there's a lot of our poop and there's a lot of fertilizer.
I mean, obviously, with the old cesspools or whatever used to be out there, and it's obviously leaching at that time, so, I mean.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about the human waste.
I just asked the other, because I noticed the pie was getting high now with this multiple dog versus the one. It's really kind of,
But
it's really in my neighbor's yard, because it's over the fence in their field. But I've been noticing it, getting, it's they don't seem to care, but.
I'm gonna reserve my answer until we turn the tape off. Go ahead. I know.
Can any preparation be done to sour soil?
What?
Can any preparation be done to soil that seems to be sour?
So you want it to be less acidic?
For the cucumbers to taste better. The cucumbers seem to be bitter sometimes at my community.
And you're attributing that to the sweetness of the soil,
I
Or
have the
the
impression that
sourness
the
of the
soil
soil.
can be sour.
like acidic.
Is it acidic?
That's what I thought it was.
Acidic?
Interesting, and that would change the flavor of the cucumbers. It's entirely possible.
They tasted different than the ones in my backyard.
So, the wood ash
Okay.
or biochar.
Biochar, okay.
Wood ash is really good to compost.
With the whole thing with the dog manure, my initial instinct is to always compost everything before I put it in my garden.
Mhm.
Before I put anything in, I want to compost it all,
Oh, yes,
as
I
best I
understand
can.
that, right.
Right,
So
so
we'd never
like,
put it
it's
directly in there.
because you could take a whole cow and
Mhm.
cover it in wood chips and it would break down rather rapidly. So if you did the same thing with
Yeah.
that. It's just the E. coli, like, that's why it's always, they always frown at this because the extra E. coli, and so then there's that potential that it splashes up from the soil onto the plants, and then you eat it. And I've eaten a raw tomato from the garden that I swear something wasn't right about it, and I had stomach pains that were like nothing I've ever felt before. So I generally thought that was E. coli poisoning, and so I tend to stay away from that because it was uncomfortable, and I really like to eat like right out of the garden.
Yeah.
Like I love this. Yeah.
Earlier you mentioned with container gardening, building your own soil. What's like a good mix, or where would we get it, or how would we do it?
My personal preference would be to be compost, sand, and then some form of moisture retention. So cocoa peat, biochar, or I guess peat moss. I'm not really a big fan of peat moss because it's hydrophobic. So once it gets dry, it's really hard to get it wet again. So I tend to go away from it, but cocoa peat's not that readily available. Although I do have to say a lot of the cannabis stores are carrying it now, like the cannabis growing stores. So actually, a lot of really good stuff has come out of the cannabis industry in terms of potting soils and pots and supplies and stuff. Like they like put a bunch of thought into it, and there's some really great supplies that have come out of that as such. Cocoa peat is one of them. Smart Pots is the other one. They're fabric cloth bags that are
Oh, yes.
made out of recycled water bottles. They work
Would it
really
be
great.
an even, like a
So
third?
it goes like this. My base mix is 4 parts compost, 2 parts peat, 1 part sand. 4-2-1. So you're like 40% organic, or I guess 4-2-1. It's like half organic material, and then a 4th moisture retention. That's what the peat does, and then another 4th sand, which helps the drainage. The big thing about adding sand or stone dust to your soil is that they are primarily igneous rock. In the soil, the mushrooms, the mycelium, feed on the igneous rock. So when I talked about that connection between the plants, the one part I didn't say is that the fungus are releasing an enzyme onto the igneous rock, which is breaking it down. That's how they're decomposing it. When that happens, that's how it frees up the minerals that they then bring back through their network and feed to the plant. So the one thing that I add to my garden each year, a 4x8 raised bed, would be 1 quart of stone dust. And I just go to the quarry and I get stone dust. Like, it's the same thing that you use around your pavers, like paver sand. It's bluestone. It's crushed granite, which is
Yeah, how much
igneous
do you
rock.
use?
It's a quart per 4x8, like a quart, like a yogurt container. That's like, I just sprinkle it around on there because I'm like feeding the mushrooms in my head. That's what I'm doing. And you can go up to the Plymouth quarries on 53 and Weymouth, Hingham area, and like for like a couple bucks, they'll give you a 5-gallon bucket. I think it's like a $2 donation to the Jimmy Fund, and they'll give you a 5-gallon bucket. Also, this is a
You gotta bring your
really
own bucket, I say.
You gotta bring your own bucket, but this is actually really good to remember that a cubic yard is 27 cubic feet, right? A cubic foot is roughly 1 5-gallon bucket. So if you ever wanna get some sort of material, but you don't wanna have it delivered, or you don't want that much, you can go to almost any landscape supply and say, hey, I see that you charge $30 for a yard of compost. Well, that is 27 cubic feet. I have 27 5-gallon buckets. I'd like to get a yard, right? But obviously we're not gonna take 27 buckets, but you could just cut it in half, right? And so then you're like, 13, my math.
No, they don't do it that way.
You know what I mean? But they
You
will.
get a half a yard, they charge you more than half price.
No, I've had tons of places just go
A lot of places
right
don't.
down to
So you
the
don't use
amount by
those.
the bucket. Absolutely.
Well,
But they might say, oh, you gotta get a whole yard. I can
they'll
see
say, okay, the half, but it's usually a little more.
that. Oh, they'll give you like
Yeah.
add a little bit.
Yeah, they'll
Right,
add
but I'm like,
price.
well, I'm loading it myself,
Yeah.
and I'll get it. But it's just a good way to know that you don't have to have 5 yards of compost delivered, you just need a little bit, go get what you need. In fact, actually go to multiple places and get multiple different types of compost, because then you're gonna increase the biological diversity. That's a great tip too. Think about your soil like your mutual funds. Diversify. There's much different stuff in there as you can. That's actually from Mel, like Mel Bartholomew in Square Foot Gardening. He was always a big proponent of using as many types of compost as you could. Anything else? Yes?
Marsh hay, to keep the weeds. Go down
Edible
to the beach,
lettuce.
go down to the beach and get it.
Oh, seaweed.
Yeah, marsh
So
hay.
the marsh hay.
Oh, salt marsh hay.
Salt
Oh, marsh hay. Okay, yeah. I'm torn on this one for two reasons. One, because I love seaweed. Okay, for my garden, it's been one of the best things I've ever had. I've used it as mulch. I put it in my compost. I've done it in my sheet mulching, and salt marsh hay. In Massachusetts, salt marshes are the most endangered habitat. They're integral to our marine fisheries because salt marshes are where the little baby fish go and hide. It's where the big fish lay their eggs. The salt marsh hay becomes full of all sorts of larvae from the insects as it gets pushed up at the high tide. It's there. It's full of all of these bugs and critters, and then on the next high tide, it gets flushed back into the estuary where it feeds all of the fish. Because they're such an endangered habitat in Massachusetts and critical to one of our biggest industries, which is fishing, I tend to say, let's not use salt marsh hay. There's plenty of other types of hay that we can use out there that are more sustainable. Versus seaweed, the oceans are enormous and there's seaweed everywhere, but from that same thing, I've been called out and been told, well, that pile of seaweed has that same larvae and insect stuff happening that goes back into the ocean and feeds the fish. That's gonna have to be up to you. You can make that decision. Salt marsh hay works fine. I use grass clippings and they work great too, so like use what you can.
Sounds like a lot more.
I know, it's tough. That's a tough one. It's really tough because, but there are hays out there. There's tons of other hays that you can use. You don't have to use salt marsh hay, but when it comes to the seaweed, man, it's like, it's so valuable in the garden versus the salt marsh hay. It's not building the same trace minerals and soil fertility as the seaweed.
You just tilt seaweed into it?
I've used it as mulch, like straight through the growing season. I've put it on in the fall and then incorporated it. I've put it in compost. Yeah, seaweed is the best. It's really, I mean, it just has everything. I mean, it's alive. It has all different types of minerals. It has sodiums and stuff. Like, it's just, yeah, it's really great. Yeah, but that's a tough one. It is because I just don't know, like, I'm a big mouth, and so I'm talking about karma-free gardening, you know, and I'm like, let's do this like sustainably and stuff. So unfortunately, I called people out for using salt marsh hay, so now I've been called up for using seaweed, so I stopped using seaweed, but like,
I mean, you whole weed.
Well, you can get kelp meal from companies that has been sustainably harvested from the kelp forests and use that instead of the stuff from the beach. Costa Maine does sell kelp meal, but also Neptune's Harvest. In terms of fertilizers, there's a really awesome fertilizer available to everybody. They manufacture it in Marshfield. It's called Organic Plant Magic. It's the best fertilizer I've ever used. And it's actually technically not even fertilizer because like most fertilizers, you can burn your plants and hurt them, but you can take a whole entire bag of Organic Plant Magic and dump it on top of a plant and it wouldn't hurt it. In fact, it would probably make it thrive.
We're in Marshfield.
I don't know, that's just where they make it. They sell it at some of the places. Kennedy's has it.
Kennedy's,
It's on
yeah, okay.
It's on Amazon. It's amazing. It's great stuff.
Would you use that on any plant, like flowers too?
House plants, I use it everywhere. The second best fertilizer I've ever used is worm casting. Worm castings are really great and super karma-free because like worms just like wiggle around and like eat and do what they do, and if they get to one side of the box and turn around and go back into more of what they want, like that's want, so I'm okay with that, versus like a lot of the commercial fertilizers are made from byproducts of the poultry industry, primarily chickens and turkeys a lot of times, chickadee-doo-doo type stuff like that. Just because something says it's organic, like because it's organic matter, doesn't necessarily mean it's organic, like to me, like because a chicken that was raised in deplorable conditions and fed disgusting food, its waste is considered organic. But to me, that's not something I want in my garden, right? And they just drive under this warehouse floor with a bobcat, scoop that stuff up and call it organic fertilizer. Yeah, sure is, and it smells gross. As soon as you smell it, you'll be like, oh. If you ever go to Maryland, you'll know exactly what that is. Didn't know Maryland is one of the biggest chicken producing states in the country. Mm-hmm. Yep. And you'll never see a chicken in Maryland. No, you won't see one because they're all back off behind the end of the road in warehouses. The only ones you see are the ones that fly out of the trucks when they're getting moved around. Sorry. On that
Get a
note,
soft spot.
turn off the tape. Yeah, so I hope you guys have a great season. I hope it's warm and sunny and rains once a week, an inch. Everybody will be good.
Todd, thank you very much for
Thank
coming.
you.
Thank you guys. Also, I know a bunch of you guys came to the Grateful Garden when it was open, and the store was open, and thank you. That was so much fun for me, I just want you to know, but it's a huge blessing that I'm not running that store right now.
Oh, is it?
Really
Stop
good,
the
yeah.
store?
Yeah, it's super good, I'm so much happier, and so much more free, and I'm like really applying myself in ways that I find much more rewarding. So, but any of you guys that came, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
For bringing your vines, everybody.
Thank you, Lorraine.
Well, I deliberately planted tomatoes.
And they're from